Distinguished audience, today we are honored to present The Unseen Threads of Fate, a deeply moving tale of unexpected connections, profound sacrifice, and the redemptive power of forgiveness. Prepare to be captivated by a story filled with emotional highs and dramatic twists. Before we begin, please consider subscribing to our channel. We invite you to listen. The late afternoon sun, a brazen artist, bled across the cobbled streets of Old Florence, painting the ancient facades in hues of burnt sienna and rose gold. Its warmth, however, barely pierced the cool, almost sterile interior of Il Noble Café, a sanctuary of hushed conversations and the clinking of crystal. Here, amidst the gentle murmur of old money and hushed secrets, sat Alexander Sterling. He was a man carved from the finest granite of ambition and discipline, his charcoal suit impeccably tailored, his silver hair brushed back with an almost architectural precision. At 50-something, his face bore the subtle etchings of countless board meetings and high-stakes deals. Yet his eyes, a startling glacial blue, held a deeper, more profound weariness. They were eyes that had seen too much, conquered too much, and in doing so, had perhaps lost a piece of their own light. He sipped his single malt, the amber liquid mirroring the dying sun outside, a silent testament to a life of calculated perfection, yet one devoid of genuine warmth. He was a millionaire, yes, but also a monarch on a throne of his own making, utterly alone. His solitude, a carefully cultivated aura, was shattered not by a sound, but by a tremor in the air, a disruption of the cafe's tranquil rhythm. A figure emerged from the golden haze of the street, silhouetted against the dying light, a stark, almost ethereal contrast to the polished elegance within. It was Ilara Hayes. She moved with a curious blend of exhaustion and an almost defiant resilience, a slender sapling bending in the wind but refusing to break. Her simple, worn dress seemed to cling to her, hinting at a life of constant motion and little rest. Her hair, the color of rich earth after a summer rain, was pulled back haphazardly, with strands escaping to frame a face that was thin, etched with worry lines far too soon, but dominated by a pair of eyes that held the ancient wisdom of untold struggles. They were eyes that had cried oceans, but now held a flickering ember of hope, desperate yet unwavering. What truly arrested Alexander was not just Ilara, but the living constellation that orbited her. Two small children, no older than 5 and 3, clung to the fabric of her skirt like desperate barnacles to a ship, their faces smudged, but their eyes wide with childlike wonder and a flicker of fear. And cradled in Ilara's arms, almost impossibly small, was a tiny bundle, a newborn whose soft snores were the only sound escaping the silence that had suddenly fallen over Alexander's table. A baby, a newborn. The sheer impossibility of the tableau, the raw, unvarnished vulnerability paraded into his perfectly curated world, struck him. Ilara's gaze, sweeping the room, finally landed on Alexander. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was as if she had been drawn by an invisible current directly to him, a moth to the only flickering flame in a vast darkness. She approached his table, each step a testament to her resolve, her body language a desperate plea even before she spoke. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice was soft, husky, raspy at the edges, like finely ground gravel. Yet it carried an unexpected strength that cut through the genteel hum of the cafe. "I know this is highly unusual. Forgive my intrusion." She paused, her eyes, though exhausted, unwavering. Alexander, known for his ability to dissect a person's motives in a single glance, found himself disarmed. There was no artifice here, no cunning calculation, only raw, unfiltered need. She continued, her gaze falling briefly to the 3 innocent faces around her, a profound tenderness softening the weary lines on her face. "And these are Leo, Lily, and little Noah. She gestured to the children, a flicker of pride mingling with the desperation. They are not mine by birth.
They are orphans. Children I've taken in. Leo lost his parents to a sudden illness. Lily, her family in an accident that left no one else. And Noah, his young mother, she passed soon after his birth, with no one left to claim him. Her voice trembled slightly, a single tear threatening to escape the well of her eyes, but she blinked it back, determined. Alexander Sterling felt a prickle of discomfort, then a strange, unfamiliar sensation. Not pity, not entirely. It was something akin to being confronted with a stark, unadorned truth in a world of pleasant fictions. The contrast between her destitution and his opulence was jarring, a mirror reflecting a part of himself he had long suppressed. He had donated millions to charities, built hospitals, funded foundations, all from a distance, through the cold efficiency of wires and spreadsheets. But this was raw, immediate. Ilara, sensing his internal battle, pressed on, her voice gaining a desperate, almost pleading edge. "I've tried everything, sir. Every orphanage, every social service. But they are overflowing, underfunded. These children, they need a home, a chance. I cannot provide it alone anymore. I have reached the end of my resources, my strength. I saw you, and there was something in your eyes, a glimmer of hope." She paused, took a deep, shaky breath, her gaze imploring. "I am not asking for money, sir, not for myself. I am begging you for a future for them, a safe place, a chance for these little ones to simply exist." Her plea hung in the air, thick with unspoken narratives, with the weight of 3 tiny lives. Alexander's glacial blue eyes, usually so calculating, now searched her face, trying to decipher the depth of her despair, the truth of her words. He had faced down corporate raiders, outmaneuvered rivals, but this woman, this fragile, fierce guardian of 3 lost souls, presented a challenge of a different kind, a challenge that spoke not to his mind, but to something he had long ago buried beneath layers of ambition and cold logic. The cafe's ambient hum faded, replaced by the soft breathing of the children and the silent, unspoken question hanging between them. Could a man who had built an empire on detachment truly connect with such raw, unadorned humanity? The golden hour outside deepened, casting longer, more ominous shadows, hinting at the profound, unseen threads that were about to intertwine their lives. The silence that followed Ilara's desperate plea in Il Noble Café stretched, taut as a violin string, between her fragile hope and Alexander Sterling's rigid composure. His usual sharp intellect, honed by decades of ruthless corporate battles, seemed momentarily dulled by the raw, unvarnished truth laid bare before him. He observed her, the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched the sleeping infant, the way her gaze darted between him and the 2 wide-eyed children clinging to her skirt. These were not the calculated risks of the stock market, nor the abstract figures of a charity report. This was human vulnerability, breathing and palpable. A memory, fleeting and unwelcome, pricked at the edges of Alexander's mind. A distant, forgotten incident from years ago, a legal brief he'd barely glanced at, about an unfortunate traffic accident involving one of his company's vehicles. He'd signed off on the settlement, a cold, efficient transaction to close an unpleasant chapter. The specifics of the victims had been deliberately kept vague by his eager-to-please legal team, just names and numbers on a page, easily compartmentalized and discarded. He'd never allowed himself to dwell on the human cost. Now, looking at Ilara, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor ran through him.
He pushed it down, deep, a buried fear, a ghost he refused to acknowledge. He cleared his throat, the sound gruff in the sudden stillness. "Your situation is extraordinary, Miss Hayes." His voice was low, measured, betraying little. "And your courage, commendable." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the children. Leo, the older boy, with eyes like startled deer, clung tighter to Alara's leg. Lily, the little girl, had buried her face in Alara's dress. Noah, oblivious, breathed softly, a tiny, innocent sigh. "I will not offer you a handout," Alexander stated, his words clipped, causing Alara's face to fall slightly. Hope, a fragile butterfly, seemed poised to flutter away. But then he continued, "However, I possess several properties. One, a spacious apartment, lies within a short drive of my own residence. It is fully furnished, quiet, and equipped with everything a young family might need. I will provide for your sustenance, the children's education, and any medical needs they may have. In return, I ask nothing." Alara's breath hitched. Her tired eyes, moments ago filled with the brittle light of despair, now widened, brimming with disbelief. It was as if the sun had suddenly burst through the clouds. "Sir, Mr. Sterling, I don't know what to say." Her voice was barely a whisper, thick with emotion. "This is more than I could ever have dreamed." "No thanks are necessary," Alexander interrupted, his voice firm, almost dismissive, to mask the strange stirring within his own chest. The offer had spilled out of him, not from a place of calculated philanthropy, but from an unfamiliar impulse, a strange tug at the forgotten strings of his own humanity. Perhaps it was the raw, untainted innocence of the children, or the sheer, unyielding fortitude radiating from Alara, or perhaps a deeper, subconscious need to quiet that nagging whisper of a long-buried guilt. "My assistant will arrange everything. You will be contacted within the hour with the address and necessary arrangements." He nodded curtly, a signal of dismissal, and turned to summon the waiter for his check. He needed to escape, to process this unprecedented deviation from his carefully ordered life. Alara could only nod, tears finally overflowing, tracing paths down her dust-stained cheeks. She clutched the children tighter, her gaze fixed on Alexander's retreating back, a lighthouse in her storm-tossed existence. A wave of profound relief washed over her, so potent it threatened to buckle her knees. Yet, beneath the surging gratitude, a shadow lingered, a faint echo of the secret she carried, the connection between her past trauma and this man, a connection she herself was only now beginning to subconsciously piece together, an insidious suspicion that felt both absurd and terrifying. Within hours, as promised, a sleek black car whisked Alara and the children away from the harsh realities of the street. The apartment was a revelation. Sun-drenched rooms, soft carpets that swallowed their weary steps, a fully stocked refrigerator, and best of all, real beds with crisp, clean sheets. Leo and Lily explored with squeals of delight, their tiny hands tracing the smooth surfaces of furniture, their laughter echoing in the unaccustomed spaciousness. For Alara, it was a sudden plunge into an ocean of calm after a lifetime of relentless treading water. She wept silently, tears of exhaustion and profound relief, as she laid Noah gently in a pristine bassinet, the first true rest he might have ever known. Alexander, meanwhile, retreated to the sterile quiet of his penthouse, a monument to his achievements. Yet, the tranquility felt hollow. The image of Alara's determined face, the trusting eyes of the children, haunted him. He found himself pacing, something he rarely did. His life had been a meticulously crafted tapestry of ambition, success, and strategic detachment. He had mastered the art of building empires, but not of nurturing human connection. His immense wealth, once a source of supreme satisfaction, now felt like a gilded cage. He had no wife, no family in the traditional sense, only distant relatives and even more distant acquaintances, all circling his orbit for their own gain. The encounter with Alara had cracked open a window to a world he had long dismissed, a world of raw, messy, beautiful human needs. Over the next few weeks, Alexander's visits became a regular, if unacknowledged, ritual. He would arrive, often unannounced, always with a carefully selected gift for the children, a plush toy, a book, a small, intricate puzzle. He watched them from a distance at first, a silent observer. He saw Alara's tireless devotion, the way she managed to conjure joy from thin air, the way she spoke to each child with infinite patience and love. He saw Leo, the budding protector, fiercely loyal to his sisters, Lily, the dreamer, with her head perpetually in the clouds, and Noah, the tiny sunbeam, whose gurgles could somehow melt the ice around Alexander's heart. Slowly, hesitantly, he began to engage. He'd sit on the floor, attempting to build a tower with Leo, his large, powerful hands surprisingly clumsy with the small blocks. He'd read a story to Lily, his deep voice softening as he navigated the whimsical adventures of storybook characters. He'd even, once, held baby Noah, feeling the feather-light weight of the infant against his chest, a strange warmth spreading through him that felt both alien and profoundly comforting. Alara, initially wary of his aloofness, began to see past the polished exterior of the tycoon. She saw the subtle softening of his gaze when he looked at the children, the almost imperceptible smile that touched his lips when Lily giggled. She sensed a deep-seated loneliness in him, an emptiness that mirrored her own before the children had filled it. He wasn't just a benefactor, he was becoming something more. A quiet guardian, perhaps, a silent, watchful presence. She began to share more about her past, her childhood, the struggles she'd faced. She never delved into the full, raw details of the accident, not wanting to burden him, but she spoke of her parents with a wistful, aching fondness. "They were everything to me," she'd once whispered, her eyes distant, taken too soon, in an instant, by a reckless driver, a moment that shattered my entire world. Alexander listened, his expression neutral, but each word was a splinter, digging deeper into his subconscious. Reckless driver, shattered world. The phrases echoed the vague memories of that old legal brief. He felt a growing unease, a cold dread coiling in his stomach. He dismissed it as a coincidence before, but now a chilling symmetry was beginning to emerge. He tried to rationalize it away. Italy has millions of accidents. It's just a coincidence. Yet the thought persisted, a persistent, unwelcome hum beneath the surface of his carefully constructed tranquility. One evening, after the children were asleep, Alexander found Alara staring out the window, a quiet sadness etched on her face. "You carry a great weight, Alara," he observed, his voice unusually gentle. "Beyond the children, there's a sorrow within you." Alara turned, a faint smile playing on her lips, tinged with melancholy. "We all have our burdens, Mr. Sterling. Mine are just more visible." She paused, then added, "My parents, it happened so many years ago. A highway accident. They were just gone. The details are hazy now, but the loss never truly leaves. Just a vague sense of a large vehicle, a driver who was apparently distracted." Distracted? Alexander's voice was sharp, a sudden, almost involuntary reflex. He remembered the driver's report, a momentary lapse of attention. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drum. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. This was too much. The pieces, fragmented and disparate, were beginning to form a horrifying mosaic. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He had to know. He had to confirm. Do you have any documentation from that time, Alara? He asked, his voice strained, barely audible. Alara hesitated, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. Why do you ask, sir? Alexander met her gaze, a tempest brewing behind his usually impassive blue eyes. Just a professional curiosity.
Sometimes details can be unearthed if one knows where to look. Perhaps there was something overlooked. He lied, his voice remarkably steady, despite the turmoil within. He knew this was a dangerous path, a precipice from which there might be no return. But the compulsion to know, to confront the monster he feared he might be, was overwhelming. Ilara, after a moment of consideration, nodded slowly. I do have some old papers. My aunt kept them for me. They're in a dusty box back in the small storage unit I had before all this. Her words, simple and unassuming, were like a fuse lit to a powder keg. Alexander felt a surge of both dread and a grim determination. The truth, like a relentless tide, was coming in. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that soon, very soon, he would drown in it. The chapter closed on the silent, unspoken promise of a revelation that threatened to shatter the fragile peace they had just begun to build. The question, do you have any documentation, police reports, legal papers, hung in the air between Alexander and Alara, a fragile bridge stretching over an abyss of unspoken truths. Ilara's brief hesitation, her eyes searching his for a hidden motive, was a stark mirror to Alexander's own internal turmoil. He had managed to feign professional curiosity, but the truth, like a shark circling just beneath the surface, was drawing closer. He felt the cold dread that had settled in his stomach expand, a leaden weight pulling him down. I do, Ilara finally confirmed, her voice soft, almost hesitant, as if the words themselves held a delicate, dangerous power. My aunt, my mother's sister, kept a box of my parents' belongings. She said I should hold on to them for when I was ready. They're in a small storage unit, a place I never really touched after it happened. Her gaze drifted, lost in a distant memory, a past that still bled into her present. The mention of the storage unit, a dusty vault of forgotten pain, sent a shiver down Alexander's spine. It was a tangible link, a physical manifestation of the thread he now feared was binding them in the most cruel and unimaginable way. Good, Alexander managed, his voice a little too clipped, a little too quick. He needed to see those papers. He needed to confirm his worst fears, or, God willing, finally put them to rest. We can arrange to retrieve them, perhaps tomorrow? His urgency was barely concealed, a stark contrast to his usual measured calm. Ilara, sensing the shift, looked at him with renewed apprehension. What was it about these old papers that so rattled the composed millionaire? The next day dawned under a sky the color of bruised plums, mirroring the unease that churned within both Alexander and Ilara. They drove in Alexander's sleek, silent sedan to the modest, almost forgotten storage facility on the outskirts of the city. The air inside the cramped, dusty unit was thick with the scent of old paper and forgotten dreams. Ilara, with a deep, shaky breath, pulled out a worn cardboard box labeled simply, Parents. Her fingers, slender and calloused from years of hardship, trembled slightly as she opened it.
Alexander watched, a silent sentinel, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. He saw photographs, yellowed with age, of a young, laughing couple, Ilara's parents, no doubt. He saw trinkets, letters, and then a stack of official-looking documents bound with a faded rubber band. Among them, a thick envelope stamped with official seals. Police report, traffic accident. He reached out, his hand surprisingly unsteady, and took the envelope. Ilara watched him, her brow furrowed with a mixture of curiosity and a vague, budding sense of dread. As Alexander pulled out the contents, his eyes scanned the formal jargon, the dates, the locations. His breath hitched. The details matched. The precise date, the intersection, the description of the other vehicle involved. A large... The blood drained from Alexander's face, leaving it ashen, starkly contrasting with the vibrant sunlight now streaming through the storage unit's small window. The silence in the small space became a roaring torrent in his ears. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It wasn't just a coincidence. It wasn't just a vague connection. The truth, brutal and undeniable, slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. He, or rather his empire, his negligence, had been the direct cause of the very tragedy that had orphaned Ilara and set her on this unimaginable path of suffering. The unseen threads were no longer invisible. They were a cruel, tangled knot around his very soul. Ilara, observing the dramatic shift in his demeanor, the way his knuckles had turned white gripping the papers, felt a cold dread creep up her spine. Her own eyes, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name, landed on the documents in his hand. She saw the familiar name, Sterling, the name of her benefactor, starkly printed next to vehicle owner. Her gaze darted to the description of the car, then back to Alexander's horrified face. A sharp, icy claw of realization gripped her heart. No, it couldn't be. The man who had given her and the children hope. Mr. Sterling? Her voice was a fragile whisper, barely audible above the ringing in her ears. What is it? Alexander didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. His mind was a maelstrom of guilt, shock, and a profound, sickening horror. He had spent years building a fortress around his emotions, convincing himself that wealth could shield him from consequence, that strategic distance could prevent personal pain. Now, the fortress had crumbled, revealing the raw, bleeding wound beneath. He, the man who had always been in control, felt utterly, hopelessly broken. The accident, Ilara, he finally managed, his voice a strained, broken rasp. Your parents, the vehicle involved, it was mine, driven by my chauffeur. He didn't look at her, couldn't bear to meet her gaze. His eyes were fixed on the document, as if it held the power to condemn him. I was informed of the incident. There was a settlement, legal proceedings. I instructed my team to handle it. I never knew the names of the victims. Not truly, not until now. Each word was a confession, a self-indictment. Ilara stood frozen, her blood running cold. The air, already stale with dust, seemed to thicken, suffocating her. Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile the compassionate savior with the unwitting destroyer of her world. The man who had offered her a lifeline, the man whose kindness had begun to thaw the ice around her heart, was the same man whose actions, however unintentional, had orphaned her. It was a twist of fate so cruel, so impossibly ironic, that it felt like a nightmare. Her small, fragile world, which had just begun to rebuild itself, suddenly splintered. You, she began, her voice barely a breath, filled with a mixture of disbelief, betrayal, and a deep, agonizing pain. You were the one? The questions that had plagued her childhood, The silent screams of a young girl left adrift suddenly had a face, a name, and it was the name of the man who now stood before her, his own face contorted in a mask of guilt. A sudden, sharp cry from Leo, who had wandered to the back of the unit and stumbled, momentarily broke the unbearable tension. Alara flinched, her eyes darting to her ward, the innocent child a stark reminder of her responsibilities, of the lives that depended on her. The raw emotion of the revelation crashed against the immediate demands of her present. Alexander, hearing the child's cry, lifted his head. His eyes, though still clouded with torment, met Alara's. He saw the betrayal, the pain, the profound shock, but he also saw something else, a fierce, primal protectiveness for the children that transcended even her personal anguish. He knew, with a certainty that pierced his own despair, that this was not just about him and Alara anymore. This was about the fragile future of Leo, Lily, and Noah, whose lives were now inextricably linked to this devastating secret.
The weight of the past, the brutal reality of his unintentional crime, threatened to crush him. Yet a new, equally powerful feeling began to stir, a desperate need to atone, to make right what could never truly be made right. But how? How could he ever bridge the chasm of this revelation? The dusty air in the storage unit seemed to pulse with the unbearable truth. The chapter ended not with a resolution, but with a gaping wound laid bare, leaving both Alexander and Alara teetering on the edge of an abyss, the future of their unlikely bond hanging precariously in the balance. The small storage unit, once a forgotten vault of memories, had transformed into a crucible, forging an agonizing truth that burned both Alexander and Alara. His confession, broken and raw, hung in the air, a poisonous shroud. Alara's world, which had just begun to unfurl its fragile petals, violently recoiled. Her initial shock morphed into a cold, suffocating grief, a profound sense of betrayal that cut deeper than any hunger or hardship she had ever known. You were the one?" Her whisper, barely audible, was a razor's edge, slicing through the thin veneer of civility that had previously bound them. The sound of Leo's innocent cry from the back of the unit, a sudden burst of sound in the charged silence, seemed to mock the adult devastation unfolding. Alara instinctively moved, sweeping Leo into her arms, her back to Alexander, a physical manifestation of the emotional wall that had instantly erected itself between them. Alexander stood, rooted to the spot, the police report still clutched in his white-knuckled hand, its official jargon now screaming of personal tragedy. He watched Alara, her slender frame shaking, her shoulders hunched with a burden he had unknowingly placed upon her. His throat was a desert, his tongue thick with unspeakable remorse. He had always believed in the power of wealth to absolve, to insulate, to mend. But this wound was beyond the reach of any fortune. It was a gaping chasm, carved by his own indirect hand, separating him from the very woman who had unexpectedly brought a flicker of light into his solitary existence. "Alara," he began, his voice hoarse, I never knew. Believe me, I swear, had I known it was your family." She whirled around, her eyes, once filled with a cautious hope, now ablaze with a fierce, cold fire he had never seen. They were the eyes of a wounded animal, cornered and fighting for its life. "Known? What difference would it have made, Mr. Starling? Would it have brought them back? Would it have spared me years of living on the edge of despair, scavenging for every scrap of hope, fighting for every breath, for these children?" Her voice rose, raw with unshed tears,
punctuated by the soft, comforting pats she gave Leo, who now burrowed into her neck. "You signed a paper, a transaction, while my world crumbled? While a little girl was left adrift in a sea of grief, haunted by a blurred memory of a massive car that stole her parents?" The words struck him, each one a hammer blow. He had seen himself as a benefactor, a silent savior. Now he was the architect of her past agony. The contrast was a cruel, mocking irony. He, Alexander Sterling, the man who prided himself on control, was utterly helpless in the face of this raw, unforgiving accusation. He looked at the children, their innocent faces peering out from behind Alara, sensing the tremor in the air, but not understanding its source. Lily, usually so vivacious, was quiet, clutching Alara's other leg, her thumb in her mouth. Noah, mercifully, remained asleep in Alara's arms. I want to help you, Ilara," he pleaded, his voice cracking, a sound utterly alien to his usual commanding tone. "I will dedicate everything to making amends, to building a future for these children that is truly secure, truly full of joy. Let me do this." Alara let out a bitter, disbelieving laugh. "Help me? How can you help me, Mr. Sterling? With your money? Can money buy back lost years? And can it fill the void in my heart? You talk of making amends, but what amends can be made for a life stolen, for a childhood shattered?" Her words were a torrent, fueled by years of repressed pain, now unleashed with brutal force. "You offered me a safe place, a beacon of hope, and all along, that beacon was forged from the very darkness that consumed my family." The accusation hung heavy, poisoning the air. Alexander felt a profound emptiness, a cold, hollow ache where his conscience had once been a distant concept. He had built his empire on the belief that everything had a price, that every problem could be solved with enough resources. Now, he faced a problem that defied all his calculations, a debt that could never truly be repaid. "I understand your anger," Alexander said, his voice calmer now, but laced with an unbearable sorrow. "I deserve it, all of it. But please, Alara, do not let my past mistake, my unwitting involvement, destroy the future of these children. They deserve a chance, a life free from the struggles you've endured, a life you fought so hard to give them." He made a hesitant step towards her, a hand outstretched, then quickly withdrew it as Alara instinctively recoiled. The physical distance between them was a stark testament to the emotional chasm. "And what about me, Mr. Sterling?" she challenged, her voice low and dangerous, a predator's growl. "Do I just forget? Do I live under the roof of the man who caused my parents' death? Every time I look at you, will I see the face of their killer? Will I see the monster that haunted my lonely nights?" His jaw tightened. "I am no monster, Alara. A man capable of grave error, perhaps? A man blinded by ambition and detachment, but not a monster. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you, if you let me." He met her gaze directly now, his eyes, though filled with torment, holding an unwavering resolve. This was a battle he could not win with wealth or power, only with raw honesty and a desperate plea for understanding. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft, almost imperceptible whimpers of Lily, who had begun to cry softly, sensing the intense distress emanating from Alara. The sound pierced through Alara's anger, reminding her of the innocent lives at stake. Her shoulders slumped. Her fury, potent as it was exhausting. She looked at the children, then back at Alexander, her gaze flickering between the deep pain in her heart and the desperate hope for their future. "I need time," she finally said, her voice thin, fragile. I need to think, to breathe. I can't be here right now. I need to take the children." She turned, her movements stiff, and began to gather her things, her focus entirely on her young charges. Alexander wanted to reach out, to plead, to explain, but he knew any further words from him would only serve to deepen the wound. The truth had exploded between them, leaving behind a battlefield of shattered trust. As Alara led the children out of the storage unit, their small hands clinging to her, their innocent faces bewildered, Alexander watched them disappear into the bleak afternoon light. He was left alone amidst the dusty boxes, the damning papers still in his hand, a solitary figure dwarfed by the enormity of his revelation. The golden hour had long passed, leaving only the cold, unforgiving gray of a sky that seemed to weep alongside his shattered soul. He knew this was the ultimate test, not of his wealth, but of his character. And the outcome, for the first time in his meticulously controlled life, was utterly beyond his grasp. The chasm had opened, and both their fates hung precariously on its edge. The silence in the storage unit, thick with the weight of Alara's pain and Alexander's crushing guilt, stretched into an agonizing eternity. As Alara led Leo and Lily away, their small forms
His world, once a fortress of control and logic, had been utterly dismantled, leaving him vulnerable, exposed. The cold realization that his ambition, his detachment, had directly led to Alara's profound suffering, clawed at his soul. For days, the luxurious apartment, once a haven for Alara and the children, became a place of quiet agony. Alara, though still physically present, had retreated into herself. Her eyes, shadowed by exhaustion and betrayal, held a distant, hollow look. She fulfilled her duties to the children mechanically, her every movement a testament to a spirit wounded deeply. Leo and Lily, sensitive to the shift in atmosphere, became quieter, their laughter muted, their little faces reflecting a bewildered sadness. Baby Noah, oblivious to the storm raging around him, remained her only pure source of solace, his soft cries a tether to the present. Alexander, meanwhile, became a ghost in his own opulent life. He returned to his penthouse, but its grandeur now felt oppressive, a constant reminder of the price of his empire. Sleep eluded him, haunted by Alara's accusing eyes and the spectral image of her parents' final moments. He revisited every detail of the accident report, his legal team's assurances that everything was handled, now ringing hollow, mocking him. He realized with chilling clarity that his past self, the man consumed by ambition, had consciously chosen ignorance over empathy, convenience over accountability. That man was a stranger to him now, a monstrous caricature he could barely recognize. Driven by an overwhelming need to atone, Alexander returned to the apartment. He found Alara sitting by the window, staring out at the cityscape. Her profile etched against the darkening sky like a fragile silhouette. The children were asleep, their innocence a stark contrast to the turmoil that churned between the adults. "Alara," he began, his voice raspy, stripped of its usual authority. He looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing not just the pain, but the immense strength that had allowed her to survive, to nurture life amidst desolation.
I understand if you can never forgive me. I know I have no right to ask, but I need you to know the depth of my remorse. Not the remorse of a wealthy man fearing legal repercussions, but the remorse of a man who has finally seen the devastating human cost of his own detachment. He knelt before her, a stark gesture of humility that would have been unthinkable for Alexander Sterling weeks ago. The CEO of Sterling Enterprises kneeling on the carpet of his own apartment before a young woman he had unwittingly wronged. My life was a monument to control, to order. I thought I could insulate myself from chaos, from pain, even from the consequences of my own actions by delegating and dismissing. I dismissed the details of that accident because it was messy, inconvenient. I never asked for the names. I never allowed myself to see the faces, the lives shattered. And in doing so, I became blind. Blind to my own humanity. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. You, Ilara, and these children, you have torn down the walls I built around myself. You forced me to see the man I became and the man I should have been. You've shown me what true strength is, not in conquering empires, but in loving, in sacrificing, in simply enduring. His gaze met her, raw and vulnerable. I cannot change the past. I cannot bring back your parents. But I can dedicate every waking moment, every resource I possess, to ensuring that Leo, Lily, and Noah, and by extension you, live a life of comfort, safety, and most importantly, love. A life built on true compassion, not just a transaction. Alara's gaze, which had remained cold and distant, softened, almost imperceptible as she spoke. She saw the genuine anguish in his eyes, the naked vulnerability he had rarely shown. She saw the man, not the tycoon.
The words he spoke were not just hollow apologies. They were a profound confession, a stripping away of the layers of arrogance and self-importance that had defined him. He was a different man than the one she had initially sought help from, a man utterly broken by his own truth. The silence returned, but this time it was not the silence of judgment, but of profound contemplation. Ilara looked at the sleeping children, then at Alexander, kneeling before her, a symbol of remorse. Her heart ached, a complex tapestry of lingering pain, dawning understanding, and a strange burgeoning empathy. She remembered the sheer terror of her own childhood after her parents died, the cold indifference of the system, the brutal fight for survival. Alexander, however indirectly, had caused that. But he was also the man who had pulled her from the brink, who had offered safety and hope when no one else would. Could she truly deny the possibility of redemption, not just for him, but for herself? Could she let bitterness consume the chance for a new future for these innocent children? I hate what you did, Ilara finally said, her voice thin, her eyes burning. I hate that your comfort and detachment cost me so much. But I also see what you are doing now. I see what you are becoming. And these children, they love you. They have known nothing but kindness from you. A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek. My parents, they would have wanted me to find peace. They would have wanted me to build a good life, not cling to anger. She closed her eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. When she opened them again, the raw pain was still there, but mixed with something else, a fragile, shimmering light of hope. I cannot erase the past, Mr. Sterling, but I can try to forgive. Not for your sake, but for mine. For Leo, Lily, and Noah. For the future we are building. Alexander's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a fragile hope. Ilara, thank you. Thank you. It was a whisper, filled with a gratitude so immense it transcended words. He slowly rose,
feeling a lightness he hadn't experienced in decades, as if a monumental weight had been lifted from his soul. Over the next few months, their unique family blossomed. Alexander, true to his word, dedicated himself fully to his new purpose. He restructured his life, delegating more, stepping away from the daily grind of empire building. His vast wealth, once a symbol of power, became a tool for nurturing. He established a foundation in Ilara's parents' names, not for public acclaim, but as a private act of penance, dedicated to supporting orphaned children and improving road safety. He spent his days not in boardrooms, but in parks, teaching Leo to kick a ball, sketching with Lily, or simply holding little Noah, his presence a constant source of calm and joy. He saw the world anew through their eyes, a world of simple wonders, of boundless love, of small everyday miracles. Ilara, once haunted by her past, found a profound healing in this shared purpose. Her fierce independence softened, allowing Alexander to truly be a partner, a protector. They navigated the complexities of their unique relationship, a bond forged in tragedy but refined by compassion and forgiveness. One sunny afternoon, years later, the once somber Alexander Sterling stood in a sprawling garden, watching Leo, a strapping young boy, kick a soccer ball with boundless energy. Lily, a vibrant, artistic girl, sat sketching under a tree, occasionally glancing up with a bright smile. And Noah, now a mischievous toddler, chased butterflies, his laughter like wind chimes. Ilara, her face radiant with a newfound peace, stood beside Alexander, her hand finding his. The lines of worry had softened, replaced by a serenity she had never thought possible for her. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet triumph. "We built it, a true home."
Alexander squeezed her hand, his gaze sweeping over the vibrant scene. His eyes, once glacial, now held a warmth that reflected the golden sunlight. The vast, empty space in his heart had been filled, not by conquest or acquisition, but by the purest form of human connection. The unseen threads of fate, once cruel and tangled, had finally woven a tapestry of love, forgiveness, and redemption, proving that even from the deepest wounds, a beautiful and enduring happiness could emerge. To our esteemed audience, we hope The Unseen Threads of Fate has resonated deeply with your hearts. This story reminds us that even in the face of profound loss and unwitting harm, the capacity for compassion and forgiveness is boundless. It teaches us that true wealth lies not in material possessions, but in the connections we forge and the willingness to atone for our mistakes. May it inspire you to seek understanding, extend grace, and believe in the possibility of redemption even in the most challenging of circumstances. Thank you for listening. Please leave your comments below, hit the like button, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that move the soul. We appreciate your support.